Okay, and we are live. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for honoring us today again for joining the Construction Carbon Talk Show. And it's been an exciting time over the period of couple of months since the talk about net zero has been going on. And today we thought it would be nice for us to talk about the skills that are required for construction carbon reduction, because the UK and the world are moving towards, net zero goal in 2050. Some countries have said 2040, some have said 2060. But the major thing is that the infrastructure that we have in place needs to probably be retrofitted, or when we are building new ones, we need to actually put in place the net zero goal while designing, while constructing this infrastructure project and buildings. And we have no other person that can discuss that with us than Dr. Natasha Watson of Borough Appord. And Dr. Natasha, can you kindly tell us about yourself?
Yep, sure. So hi everyone. I am a structural engineer by training. So I did my undergrad at the University of Bath. I did the civil and architectural engineering degree there. And when I graduated in 2010, I wanted to stay in the Southwest, but there weren't really that many graduate jobs available
Okay.
for me then. So the opportunity to do an engineering doctorate, which is slightly different from a PhD, and I can go into that if people want me to. I managed to get onto an engineering doctorate program where I investigated why we weren't using more low impact building materials in the UK. Um, After I completed that, I started at Bureau Happold as a structural engineer. And I always had the sort of low impact building materials
Okay.
stuff in the back of my head. And quite recently, so February this year, I got promoted to being the UK Structures Embodied Carbon Lead. So I get to work on our fledgling structural advisory work on embodied carbon, sort of consultancy and reduction and mitigation, etc. I also get to upskill my colleagues and others as well, so wider industry, about embodied carbon mitigation and reduction. And then also, as part of that, I do sort of like dip into different disciplines, and I do also look at the interfaces with embodied carbon and different areas. So, intersectional environmentalism, circular economy, those kinds of things, because carbon isn't the only thing that we need to really focus on. There is a wider range of sustainability aspirations that we should live up to.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you
Cool.
so much. And I think that sort of leads us nicely to the
Cool.
next question, because, as the embodied carbon lead
Mm,
for a structure in Borough Appord, which is an amazing, consultancy outfit. And I discovered that you are also responsible for upskilling your colleagues, in
yeah.
terms of the embodied carbon understanding, which I believe is very important, because not so many
Mm,
people have this, knowledge about embodied carbon and, the wider construction carbon. So
yeah.
can you kindly tell us, why do we need to actually develop, this carbon reduction skills as an industry?
So I think that us as an industry need to improve our skills because everyone that works in this industry has a part to play. And everyone that works in this industry has the ability to reduce the carbon emissions associated with our projects. You
Okay.
may feel, as potentially a structural engineer, potentially as a project manager, as a contractor, that maybe you don't have that agency to make reductions, but actually you do. There are there are different ways of being able to play a part in this process, and they can range from even just bringing it up in the conversation,
Okay.
bringing it up in your next site meeting, in your next design review, in your next email to a colleague. And even sort of just engaging in the discussion, you can talk about how for that particular project, for that particular sphere of influence that you have,
Mhm.
that you can make a reduction. And that's why I think that upskilling everyone, not just your MDs, not just your clients, not just our sustainability colleagues, it's everyone's responsibility.
Absolutely.
And it's only through engaging and understanding a bit more about what it is will you be able to see how you can make a difference today in
Okay.
it. So, yeah,
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And so, Dr. Watson, our audience today, they are from different backgrounds. And
sure.
of course, people that are going to be listening to the show once it's up on YouTube.
Hmm.
Some are in oil and gas,
Yeah,
some are in the construction industry, building, construction. Some are just, general project managers for different projects, road, railways, transportation sector, etc. Can you kindly, sort of walk us through what you think are the critical skills, okay, that you would say, is sort of important, in delivering, decarbonization goal for any project?
for
Maybe
any
as a
project.
project manager, as someone that is a designer and all of that.
Yeah. I think that the first step would be engaging with the information that's already out there.
Okay.
Um, I I believe, I mean, I might be biased because I'm a structural engineer, but the Institution of Structural Engineers and Will Arnold, who is the climate emergency sort of person for them, has really spearheaded a series of information that's available. And I think even though it's got the iStructy heading to it,
Okay.
it's written for anyone who is a a working professional within the construction industry. Yes, it's produced by the Institution of Structural Engineers, but a lot of the information that's there is
Mhm.
relevant to anyone that's working um, in the built environment or in renewable energy or all that kind of stuff, because a lot of the similar, a lot of things are quite similar there as well. Um, as well as engaging with the information that is already out there. There's also the UKGBC. So the United Kingdom Building Council has a lot of information out there. They've got information that's written for policymakers, for designers, for clients, lots of different sectors as well. So really, really have a look there. It's written in a way that's meant to be accessible for someone that doesn't know about embodied carbon in the first instance.
Okay.
Once you've done that, I think that the second thing that is important to do is understand that we need to have these conversations before we feel like we're an expert in it.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if you don't know everything and you don't know all the answers. What
Okay.
matters is that you're starting the conversation, because the kinds of projects we work on are so complex. Like a whole building is complex. I can't design a whole building or the MEP or the civils, etc.
Hmm.
So I rely on my colleagues to understand where the interfaces are, how we can make the most efficient decisions.
Okay.
It's the same thing with embodied carbon. I can come from um, a place, and people who work in oil and gas industry, people who work in um, sort of laying pipelines, people who work
Hmm.
in landscape architecture. You can come from your different disciplines
Okay.
and want to engage with other disciplines on embodied carbon, um, and know something about your discipline, embodied carbon, and then kind of just open up the conversation. And I think that it's a case of being comfortable in the uncertainty, being comfortable saying, you know what, I don't know, but
Okay.
us as a project team, we can find an answer and we can
Okay.
make a step forward as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. And so, still staying on that, you
Yeah.
mentioned something which is quite important and germane, which is the issue of collaboration.
Yes.
One our first episode was, talking about how collaboration can assist, to push construction carbon reduction. So when we look at collaboration, I may be wrong, but it is my understanding that sometimes, people tend to sort of work in silos. For instance, you mentioned iStruct E, all right,
Mm,
and there is
yeah,
also Institution of Civil Engineers. There's also RIBA, and all of that,
yeah.
professional associations here and there. So each of these professional associations sort of have their, guidelines on the sort of skills that each of their professional need to develop, okay,
Mm.
to reduce carbon reduction. How would you suggest that this professional association can sort of come together so that they develop, if you like, a playbook, okay,
Mm.
that can be accessible to everyone, and that everybody, like whether I'm a structural engineer, I'm an electrical engineer, or a mechanical engineer, what have you, can actually, key in, okay, because so everybody will understand that, okay, we are doing something that is going to affect the major goal of this project, which is reduction of carbon, right? So what would be your suggestion, around that area of, bringing everybody together in the same room to ensure that that happens, rather than, individuals then start talking during a construction project, and they are not agreeing. Of course, there will be disagreement, but to ensure that the disagreement is quite minimal.
So I would say that in terms of, just to break it down, in terms of the collaboration aspects,
Yes.
um, I think that understanding the value that you can bring in your silo
Okay.
is really good to understand, because then you know what you're bringing to the table
Okay.
as as like an expert in that area.
Okay.
Once you understand how you can help in your area of expertise,
Okay.
um, I don't think that necessarily you have to do that first, but I think you need to keep it in the back of your mind when you're starting out on the collaboration. Um, then you know what value you can add to this discipline, that area, etc., etc. And I think that uh, in terms of being collaborative, the people who are working in the net zero sphere from the ICE, from the iStructy, from REBA, they talk to each other. Like
Okay.
with the LETI, so the London Energy Transformation Initiative,
Mm-hmm.
they put together certain embodied carbon targets, and
Okay.
there was an exercise in carbon target alignment, which
Okay.
was LETI, the iStructy, and the IRBA talking to each other to
Okay.
ensure that they were trying to say the right thing.
Okay.
So there has been collaboration in that area. There's also another group called Zero,
Yes.
which you may be aware of if you
Yeah,
search
I'm a member
Zero
of
on LinkedIn.
Zero.
You're a
I,
member of Zero.
yeah, I
There you
just joined
go.
Zero last week.
Fabulous. I mean, Zero is meant to be even more, I don't want to say even more collaborative, because I feel like that diminishes the work that has already been done.
Yeah.
But it's a case of the non tech non I don't want to say non-technical either. The kind of people who work on projects who do the
Project.
technical delivery.
Yes.
We know our stuff, and we talk to each other, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily as inclusive as it could be with,
Okay.
say, the commercial people that might work on our projects, the finance I mean the finance people who may work on our projects, etc. Whereas I think with Zero, they've got a lot of different backgrounds in
Grounds.
like the wider sphere of project delivery, and part of their MO is to upskill everyone in I would say, a wider sphere of influence, collaborative space.
Okay.
And so I think following the right sort of Twitter feeds, LinkedIn people, etc., you'll be
Mm-hmm.
able to understand what collaborative stuff is happening
Mm-hmm.
now,
Mm-hmm.
and if anything, rather than you trying to start something new,
New.
feed into the things that are already existing, because those are the people who are really determined, who want to get things to
Get things.
change. So it makes more sense for you to add your voice to that pre-existing group rather than necessarily try and set up by yourself as well.
Interesting. So it means that our viewers that are not from the UK,
Mm.
this is something I think that is going to be beneficial, to those viewers of ours. So within your sphere of influence or within your country, within your
Yeah,
industry, you could sort of create a group like Zero. Everybody can go on LinkedIn, you could just type Zero. You would see, what Zero is about, and the sort of collaboration that exists. I mean, so people can actually replicate this, outside of the UK. And also, professional associations, outside of the UK also, can take a cue from what you said in terms of,
mm,
Letty, I-E, Reba coming together, to sort of,
definitely.
streamline carbon targets. And I think that this is one thing I sort of, talk about each time I'm opportune to also, talk about carbon reduction. And I talk about the need for people to come together, especially professional associations, to come together, to agree on a target. And so their members, they can then, push this to their members, and members would then be able to understand that, they are not, working out of, the professional code, in quotes. So
Exactly.
thank you so much for that. So just to build up on that, in terms of skill acquisition,
Hmm.
so far you've basically spoke about how employers or employees within an organization can come together, right? So
Yep.
let's throw it out. Who do you think, in your opinion, is responsible for the major upskilling of professionals? And if you can kindly add the upcoming professionals as well, regarding
Yeah.
skills that is needed for carbon reduction during construction. Who do you think? Is it the government? Is it the academia? Is it employers through apprenticeship or thereabouts?
It's a good question. I think that um, universities and employers that have apprenticeship programs which are teamed with other higher education establishments have a definitely have a major part to play on instilling what is important to the industry and
Okay,
where you can find that information, and also preparing those students for life in the real world. And life in the real world is sustainability is very important.
absolutely.
Um, and I know that there are definitely people who have been working for maybe particular companies, maybe they've been working for a couple of years, etc., who might feel still that cost is the most important thing. But
Yes,
actually, you're seeing it now. Sustainability is being written into planning conditions. It's
yes.
been written into the requirements from clients because they know they won't get funding unless,
Okay,
like from banking establishments, unless it's sustainable. There is something called the United Nations Net Zero Banking Alliance,
okay,
which is part of the United Nations Economic Program Financial Initiative or Environmental Program, UNEPFI,
oh,
UNEPFI, and that Net Zero Banking Alliance is in control of, I think the last time I looked was a couple of months ago, but it's over £1 trillion worth of assets.
wow.
43% of of financial institutions are part of that. And part of those, like, the guidance for having sustainable banking systems is
Okay,
divesting from high carbon industries.
okay,
That's that's a massive simplification, but a lot of it is, if a company doesn't have a net zero carbon target,
Okay.
should we invest in it?
Okay.
And you're seeing it come through now with clients such as members of the Better Building Partnership, which are a lot of asset developers based in London in the UK. um, they all have net zero carbon targets, and that's
Okay.
great. And the people that I've worked with as part uh, who are part of those um, asset 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 developers, etc., they know that if they have low embodied carbon projects,
Okay.
they will have to pay less, spend less to offset the rest as
Interesting.
well. So it's you're seeing it trickle down from our financial systems now.
Okay.
And I think that that's a really, I feel like I went off on a bit of a tangent, but
No,
I think that that's a,
it's
that's a
it's
really important thing to mention, and I
yeah.
think it's an important thing um, for people to understand. And I don't know if that comes from industries, or if that does come from academia, or if that comes from um, your institutional bodies, etc. But
I mean, it's quite. I love what you've said because again, what I can deduce from that is that organizations, right? They need
mm,
to sort of put money into upskilling, their employees, right? So they
yeah,
have that responsibility. Again, what I draw from that, from what you have said again, is that even the academia, also have that responsibility, to sort of start training
mm,
upcoming professionals, okay, on the skills that is required within the industry. And again, there needs to be a collaboration between the industry and the academia,
exactly.
so that the academia is not training um, you know uh, upcoming professional with skills that is really not relevant, in terms of when you are talking about carbon reduction. And again, there is still, that is a tripod stand, there is still need for the government as well,
Oh,
or those that are accrediting institution and courses within institution, to also put this into consideration, right, when they are accrediting courses, in terms of accreditation agencies, and for the government in terms of the kind of support they can give to organizations. So it's like the tripod stand needs to work together. Again, collaboration, they need to work together to ensure that almost everybody coming into the industry is skilled one way or the other. You know, in fact, even further education, not only universities, even further education, the colleges. Because I was
yeah.
reading a report earlier
Hmm.
today, on the CITB, right,
Yeah.
the Construction Industry Training Board. They did a massive report last year on building skills for net zero, and they
Hmm.
actually identified that there needs to be about 59,000 plumbers and HVAC professionals to assist the industry in terms of the retrofit to net zero. So
Yeah.
everybody has a role to play in this
Exactly.
future that we're looking at. And I want to quickly touch on something. And again, this is probably for the UK audience, which is something that people outside the UK can also take a cue from. There's the
Definitely.
sustainability school, the supply chain sustainability school. And I discovered that supply chain sustainability school
Hmm.
actually have a lot of would I say courses that they are developing to skill or upskill professionals in this line of construction carbon reduction, or carbon reduction generally within the construction industry. And I think this is something that other countries can also emulate, because the supply chain sustainability school, I think, is a collaboration being sponsored by different organizations. I wouldn't know if you have anything to sort of say on that as well, in terms of assisting in upskilling individuals.
I mean, with something like the supply chain sustainability school, with certain sort of almost free to access courses as
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
with those kinds of things, hats off. Like, this is definitely something that we should be doing. It should be, if you can see that there is a space that
Yeah.
is not being fulfilled through the availability of knowledge that you already have.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is just a really good, regardless of the fact that we should be doing this because we've only got one planet.
Yes.
I mean, it's the kind of thing that it's just good business acumen. Like, if you see that there's a niche and you know that it's going to be an important thing, it's
Mm-hmm.
just good business. But
Absolutely.
like I completely and utterly agree that your plumbers, your electricians, etc., need to be upskilled in understanding how we're going to have so many more air source heat pumps in our houses.
Yeah.
We're going to be moving to more, actually, even now we're I don't think I know of any new buildings that have gas supplies anyway.
Oh,
Like
that's
the way that houses are being completed now, like
now.
it's all going to be electrical systems. There
Wow.
is potentially a drawback to that. I was at an event in Bristol a very long time ago, and one of the people there was saying how um, they can't find anyone who can actually assess gas boilers anymore
Wow.
because they're almost obsolete. I say almost obsolete. My knowledge of house building is like domestic scale projects is limited, but they were really struggling to find gas certified people because so
Okay.
many more electrical systems are
Mm-hmm.
going into new builds. So there's also potentially, you need to think about um, the unintended consequences of certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's one of those things that if you have a good idea, if you socialize that idea, and if you talk to enough people, you'll be able to understand the unintended consequences of pursuing that versus that, etc. Anyway, so I think that
Let's
was just me kind of going off on one about,
no.
it's a complicated and nuanced issue.
Yes, it is a
Yeah.
complicated and nuanced issue. I totally agree, and that's why we
Mm,
need to continue to talk about it. Just like you said, having
yeah.
conversation, because nobody has all the answers. All
Oh,
right, we are all just
not at all.
learning as we go. I was reading another report by I think ECITB. I think that's the Engineering Construction Training Board or something, and their CEO was saying that everybody needs to do something. However, don't think that because you don't, have all the answers, that you should not then take the step. So you
Oh,
need to take the
definitely.
step. Whether you are in the oil and gas, or you are in power station building or residential building, commercial building,
Mm,
railway, what have you. All of those skills that you currently have are transferable. Okay.
yeah,
All you need to do, is just, start the conversation. Start looking for information regarding, just
exactly.
like you said when you were starting out, that regarding that little thing you can change now. All right, to ensure that you are moving towards skilling up for construction carbon reduction, as it were. And so Dr. Watson, one of the questions I would like to sort of ask you now is, looking at all of these things, like you said, is a bit complex, okay, and
Yes,
it
just a
seems
bit.
not, and it seems not to be, in one place, okay.
Mm,
If I want to commence upskilling now, like as an individual,
yeah.
and I want to upskill myself regarding carbon reduction, can you kindly, sort of walk me through like one, two, three things that I can do, number one, or either that, or can you sort of point me in a direction of, where do you think I can get, this knowledge from, so that I can just go and start, reading
Yeah.
up or take the course or something. Can you kindly, walk us through that?
Yeah. Okay. So, in terms of rules of thumb that you could use,
Yes.
I would say regardless of what industry you're in. I'm
Yes.
sure that there will be exceptions to this rule, but I think that for 90% of the time, this will be true.
Okay.
If you can use less of that material, resource, etc.,
Okay.
that usually means you're emitting less carbon, because to produce anything, to transport anything, to monitor anything, you're undertaking a process. And in many of those processes that you're undertaking, you're either like producing a chemical reaction,
Okay.
such as limestone being created into cement actually produces carbon dioxide as part of the chemical reaction.
Mm-hmm.
You're I mean, if you're transporting something, we don't have fully electric vehicles. And to be honest, if you've got an electric vehicle, it's highly unlikely that you're powering your battery through 100% renewable energy. If you are, well done. But there's also, yeah, maintenance. What about the rubber on your tires? Like, you need to replace your tires how many times like every how many years? Are your tires being produced from sustainable resources and such? Anyway, so even if you're using electric vehicles, there's still carbon emissions associated with that, most likely. And then if you're doing anything that's involving needing heat or electricity, so firing timber or curing, like uh, producing precast concrete, or purifying gases, or refining oil, etc., that will also require energy. And it's also unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
It is happening a bit more now, but it's highly unlikely that 100% of your energy and heat that you use for those processes uses 100% renewable, and therefore is no carbon emissions.
No carbon.
So anything you do typically
Okay.
emits carbon.
Okay.
So if you can do slightly less of it,
Less of
and
it.
whether that's a case of with a building, can you again, coming back to structural engineering, because that's what I know, but if you're building a building, does your floor slab need to be this thick? Can it be just a bit thinner, even in certain areas? Like, can you have it a bit thinner in certain places and the other thickness in other areas? Um, if you are heating and ventilating a building, can some of your like do you can you use natural ventilation or things like that in certain areas of your building? Do you need as much building services kit?
Okay.
When you're looking at your road systems,
Okay.
do you need to have that thicker subgrade for that particular ground type? Like, if the ground is really rubbish and you need to put a lot of compacted type 1 onto it, then
Okay.
fair. But if the ground type changes, can you reduce the amount of compacted type 1? So those kinds of areas where if you can reduce the amount of material or the amount of processes that you're doing,
Okay.
and being frugal about it, you'll be able to save carbon emissions. And I think that that's probably like true for, I haven't come across something where it's not true yet. So I'm happy to be corrected though. But typically, if you're frugal and you just use a bit less, that's a good first step. And that can be addressing the brief, looking a bit harder at something, doing a bit more of a calculation,
Mm-hmm.
etc., talking to the client. Do they need this much space, etc., etc. So I would say that that's a very good starting point to reducing your carbon emissions. In terms of where you can go to get a bit more information, that's probably a bit more relevant to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's, are you part of an institution? Are you part of a group.
Okay.
Did you go to university? It, and then looking at that particular institution or university group, university, etc., and looking to see if there is a sustainability arm as part of that particular institution, group, etc. If there isn't, then it's a case of maybe posting on LinkedIn. Should there be a sustainability arm to this particular institution? Or I've looked at the sustainability tab for this particular institution's website, and the latest information on there was from 2013. Maybe we
Okay.
should make a bit of a difference. Who's with me? And it's I would say that hold your institutions accountable,
Uh,
hold your industry bodies accountable, but also make full use of the fact that hopefully those institutions and industry bodies have already got some resources there, and use those as a starting point
okay.
for sure.
Interesting. Thank you so much. I think
No
what
problem.
I got out of what you said is that it's quite easy, even though the reduction of carbon, as we look at it, might seem complex, but
Yeah,
it's quite easy to start the process. Just those little things that you can do: reduction of the material usage,
yeah,
reduction of the number of hours, you sort of eat in your home, or the kind of putting controllers in place for new build or retrofit in terms of controlling some
yeah.
it.
So with retrofitting, that's a really good example. With retrofitting, if you've already got a high quality building, or at least part of a high quality building, there might be some bit of the building that's not. It doesn't have the right floor to ceiling height, or the places aren't providing the spaces that you require. I.e., they might be dark and pokey, and it might just it's, if a place isn't nice to be in and it would take a lot of effort to like change it around, you need to have a really long hard look at whether or not it's worth keeping.
Okay.
But if you can have a high quality building and actually adapt some of those processes, adapt some of the space planning to use that space rather than that, or can you actually put do you need to have, I don't know, like 100-meter squared restaurant, or could you have a 60-meter squared restaurant with a takeaway bit to it? Pulling things out of the air, but if you've got a high quality building and that's already there, you can create the spaces that you need with minimal additional material.
Okay.
And that will mean if you're adding less material, you're being frugal with your material use, which typically means lower carbon.
Yeah.
You need to balance that with, say, if the fabric performance for a building is quite poor, maybe you might need to add a bit more insulation onto the building, or replace the windows, etc. But even with those kinds of additional bits,
Yes.
it can end up still being a much lower carbon option to reuse an existing building and play around with your space planning as to what you need, than to knock it all down and start again. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's still, hanging on to that.
Mm,
I discovered that you worked on a project. Again, I don't know
yeah.
if embodied carbon reduction was considered in this project, which is the I think the is it the renovation or reconstruction of World War II
Oh
hangars.
yes, a World War II hangar. Yep.
Yeah, was embodied carbon or sort of carbon reduction, thought about on this project? And can you sort of walk us through if it's not beyond company policy or something, on
Yeah.
some of those things that?
So this was the renovation of a World War II concrete hangar
Yes.
into an office space. And the floor to ceiling height for that particular hangar was like 9 meters or something, which
Okay.
for those of you who aren't architects and engineers, it's a bit high. So, so rather than just keeping it as a single level office with a very
Okay.
high ceiling,
Okay.
we put in a steel mezzanine with cross laminated timber. So these are
Okay.
essentially big planks of timber. It's an engineered timber product, so it has a bit more strength than if you were to use natural timber as a joist system, like a joist and floorboard system, as you would find in quite a few UK homes.
Okay.
This um, very strong engineered timber slab
Okay.
between the steel elements. So we put together a mezzanine, so it sort of split the 9 meter ish
In,
height
oh, okay.
into a four and
Into,
a half and a 4.5,
oh,
which
fantastic.
is still a very generous height. We did need to obviously put quite a few services into the space so that you had the right lighting, heating, ventilation, etc.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, it created a very lovely space. And what other things that we did were um, essentially treating the concrete so
Okay.
that because it was part, we believe it was past its usable or like design life,
Okay.
but
Okay.
actually we were working with a really good um, um, we were working with a really good company. I believe they're called Concrete Repair Limited, CRL. And I could probably Google it and then double check. But they knew their stuff, so they knew what needed to be treated where. They knew how to do the testing, etc. And actually, it was really good because just talking to the right experts
Okay.
gave us a lot of confidence that we could retrofit this falling into a bit of disrepair World
Okay.
War II hangar into a really high quality office.
Office.
And yeah, I think more than necessarily a carbon intention, because this was a good number of years ago. This
Yeah.
was 5 to 6 years ago. This was before Architects Declare happened.
Okay.
Um, uh, this project happened because the client really wanted to keep the look of that existing building.
Building.
The sustainability aspect wasn't necessarily the driver.
Driver. Yes.
And I think that, to be honest, the fact that we used timber, we did a very light touch
Yes.
retrofit with the mezzanine,
Mm-hmm.
um, kept the look of the building itself. It was a sustainable building, but
Yes.
it
So
was done for other reasons. And to be
reasons.
honest, that's great. Like
Yeah.
if it's sustainable, but sustainability wasn't the main thing, good. And
Absolutely.
it was beautiful. So yeah.
Absolutely. And that's another thing. I think we maybe another webinar or another episode of the
Mm,
talk show will sort of look at that. Cost versus carbon emission, right?
yeah.
Most often than not, you discover that clients want to save money, all right, and
Hmm.
that's just what they are concerned about. And I've read tons of articles, sort of talking about how they're trying to save costs, and at the end of the day, you discover that they're actually reducing carbon as well. And again, just to be able to sort of touch upon the fact that this skills for carbon
Mm,
reduction is not something that is how do I put it? Something that is grand in terms of, oh, so we need to now go to school and then just take courses, on carbon reduction and all of that. You discover that all the little bits of wanting to sometimes save cost or
yeah.
wanting to make something look nicer, okay, and keeping the feel of the maybe the antique or Victorian look,
Yeah.
could save carbon, and you could actually claim that you've saved carbon just by calculating the carbon emission. If for instance you had demolished that wardrobe hangar to some you've demolished it and you then put together another design and build it, look
Yeah.
at the carbon ratio, you discover that you've saved a lot of carbon. And so that's something I think that our viewers also need to sort of take home today, like in terms of this skills acquisition. It's good to read, it's good to have conversation like Dr. Watson has said, but all those little things as well, like Dr. Watson have rightly mentioned as well, in terms of wanting to ensure that you keep things how they were rather than building new ones and all of that. You might not see it as a skill, but it's a skill that you are
Yeah.
utilizing in that particular project. And so
Yeah.
thank you so much for that. I love that example of that project, and I want to assume that our audience would have loved the way you broke it down. In fact, I mean, I've been reading about cross-laminated timber, but
Oh,
trust
yeah.
me, your explanation actually made me understand it better, to be
Oh,
honest.
good. I'm glad.
so so personally, I understand cross-laminated timber now better. So
Mm.
you worked on another project. I'm
Yes.
I love which is the Battersea Power Station.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
So if and I think you advise on sustainability and maybe embodied carbon emission on that project, the phase 3 or something. If you can kindly sort of talk us through that, because I think that our audience are going to also gain one or two things regarding
Mm.
how carbon can be uh, uh, saved or minimized during construction projects, which would then translate into them having that skill. Coming onto this webinar is part of skill acquisition, if you say.
Yes. Yeah. So for Battersea Power Station, I was actually the piling resident engineer, which is completely different from embodied carbon stuff. But it did mean that I was on site for a while, and I managed to talk to a couple of the phase 2 people. So
Okay.
phase 2 was about retrofitting the power station itself
Okay.
into its use that it is now.
Okay.
Um, and then a lot later, I was talking to two of my colleagues who were doing the embodied carbon calculations for the Battersea Power Station.
Okay.
And it was actually a really interesting thought exercise. So, um, Battersea Power Station, as it is, with all of that masonry,
Okay.
would not be built like that today.
Okay.
So, if you were to demolish Battersea Power Station and build up
A new
a
power
new
station.
space, a new power station, you
Oh my
wouldn't
God.
you wouldn't build it like that. So therefore, is it really a saving?
Hmm.
Because if you were to build it exactly the same, then fine, but it's highly unlikely you would
Okay.
have people on scaffolding
Hmm.
placing bricks
Yes.
20 meters up in the air.
Uh,
I think 20 meters. I don't actually know how tall it is. But so this really started a very interesting set of discussions that I think other colleagues, well, I say I think that other colleagues have been thinking about,
okay.
and we're still figuring it out. But one of my colleagues, was he did a very good piece of work, which was about how to kind of properly compare the whole life carbon emissions. So this is now more than
Okay.
embodied carbon. It's about the
Um,
operational emissions with an existing asset. Compare the whole life carbon emissions with an existing asset versus the whole life carbon emissions with a new build.
okay.
And what he did was he saw where the greenwashing was happening. So greenwashing is essentially uh, our phrase for saying something looks more sustainable than it actually is.
Actually,
And so, one example of greenwashing could be you've got an existing asset and it is 1,000 meters squared.
hmm
And when by the time you've added a bit of extra space to it, and by the time you've um, like strengthened different areas, by the time you've brought the thermal envelope up to appropriate performance, maybe it's 1,500 meters squared. and
Okay.
your embodied carbon is X
Okay.
kilograms of whatever. So you've got an embodied carbon of X kilograms of CO2e per meter squared of this 1,500 meter squared building.
Yes.
But if you were to demolish it and build something that's 3,000 meters squared,
Yes.
and you build it well, it's got a good quality facade, etc.
Okay.
Um, but it has an embodied carbon of Y, and
Okay.
that it's like embodied carbon of Y um, kilograms of CO2e per meter squared, you're the, the one that's bigger might
Yes.
potentially have a lower embodied carbon per
Carbon.
meter squared because it's twice as big.
Big.
So you can, even if it had the same tonnage
Yes.
of total tonnage of embodied carbon, the one that well, sorry, even if it had twice as many tons of embodied carbon, it would come out as performing the same because you're looking at it as a per meter squared basis, which means that, sorry for people who not necessarily that hot on maths at the moment because I haven't described it very well at all. But essentially, you're not comparing a like for like. You're comparing a bigger building
Then
with
yes.
more meter squared to a smaller building with less meter squared. So whatever you do, you need to ensure that you're communicating total tons
Okay.
of carbon,
Carbon.
not a per meter squared basis, because that's how greenwashing happens. Because
Ah,
it might look better on paper, but actually the total tons that you're emitting, which is what's the important bit,
yes.
is a lot higher. So he was very good at communicating this, a lot better than I am right now. But
Okay.
it's something that we're seeing a lot more of as well. So with Battersea Power Station, um, it was really trying to figure out, um, is it a saving as well? Like that, is it a saving actually if you demolished it, would you have built that much meter squared, or would you
Okay.
have tried to build more?
More.
And would it have looked better because you would have provided more meter squared? So it was very much a learning point, and I think that we will see a lot more of that coming out this
Absolutely.
year, next
Absolutely.
year. Yeah. And I think it's something that your viewers and yourself and everyone else need to be very aware of when you're looking at how embodied carbon and how carbon emissions are talked about. Try and get the total tonnage numbers.
Yeah.
Even
Absolutely.
though a lot of our targets are based on per meter squared,
Mhm.
I think that we should really think about those total tonnage numbers as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're right because I'm doing my PhD at the
Oh yeah,
moment,
yeah,
and I'm working on construction carbon reduction. And
yes.
while reading some articles, I discovered that when they are trying to discuss carbon reduction,
Mm,
it's not sometimes not like for like, and so these are some of the limitations, as if you like,
exactly.
like
Yeah,
we call it when we are writing, sort of point out these sort of limitations, in these articles, because this is a limitation, because we are trying to say this carbon is less than that one, and whereas it's not like for like, it's not the same building, it's not the same thing.
yeah,
So I think it's something, like you said, that we all need to sort of be aware of while at it, in terms of trying to gather or learn about carbon reduction, so that you don't end up saying that, oh yes, I've actually reduced carbon on that project, but in the real sense you haven't. So, and we're almost at the nick of
oh,
time. We've spent
good to
about
go.
55 minutes interested in having this conversation. Just before we wrap up, I would just like to, sort of thank your hub, who are the partners of this
Oh,
discussion, and
yes,
also
thank you.
Carbonetrics, which is a carbon accounting company coming up and focusing majorly on construction stage carbon calculation and reduction.
We
So,
need a lot of that, by the way. Construction stage, carbon reduction, and metrics and stuff like that.
yeah,
More.
absolutely,
We
and
need more of
that's what
it.
my PhD is about, actually.
Even better.
So
Good.
thank you so much, Dr. Watson. So as we wind down today,
Mhm.
I guess it's going to be the last question I'm going to ask you as a wind
Okay.
down, and it's
Yeah.
going to be that as a young professional, all right,
Mhm.
coming up within the carbon reduction sphere, whether be it being in construction, in project management, oil and gas and all of that, what
Yeah.
advice, would you give to that young professional coming up, especially judging from how you moved, from focusing majorly on being a structural engineer,
Mhm.
and now that you now lead, the embodied carbon. Yes, you still do structural engineering work, absolutely, but
Yeah.
that you
But
now lead, the embodied carbon for Borough Airport.
yeah.
What would you say to that young professional, maybe fresh out of school,
Yeah.
in terms of what he or she, should be focused on while building out his or her career in that line of reducing carbon?
Reducing carbon. I think first thing is don't be afraid to ask, what are you doing about carbon on this project, or how are we going to reduce carbon on that project, etc. Just don't be. I'm paraphrasing a colleague that I was on a call with yesterday. Um, but yeah, don't be afraid to speak out and just ask the question, because the worst that will happen is they'll say, you know what, we don't know, or it's not happening on this project. To
Okay.
be honest, that is a bad thing, but at least you've brought it up, and at least you've put yourself forward as someone who cares about that and isn't afraid to ask those questions. Um, and another thing, again, it's an idea that I had from a panel discussion I was part of yesterday, is if you do have an idea, don't be afraid to share it.
Absolutely.
Um, and it is from talking about these things that I've managed to get to where I am today.
So interesting.
Yeah, it's by asking questions and being there and putting the effort in for it that I am where I am today. I
That's
think another thing is when you're when you're just starting out as well, try and understand the point of view of the person that isn't confident to speak up about it.
okay.
Because I think that understanding where people don't feel they have the agency or the ability to take a lead here is a really important thing to understand, because it means that you will know, or you'll be able to learn how to um, find the right words, and to how to find the right way of talking about this in a way that doesn't seem accusing and blaming. Because
Okay.
as soon as it becomes a, why haven't you done this, this is wrong, you can shut down the conversation, and we need to have conversations
Congratulations.
to be collaborative. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Natasha Watson,
no
for the
problem, thank
engaging
you.
conversation today. And that's where we're going to draw the curtain for today. Thank you so much to our audience, for coming out today. And thank you to those that are going to catch up on the YouTube channel uh, to watch this conversation afterwards. So kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's called Construction Carbon Talk. You can follow us on Twitter. It's at C Carbon Talk. You can follow us on LinkedIn. It's Construction Carbon Talk on LinkedIn. And until we see you next time on the next episode of the Construction Carbon Talk, thank you for today.
Thank you.